Oscar Robertson, one of the greatest icons of American sports, is known worldwide as Big O, the man who turned basketball from a game into an art. He was the first guard in history to average a triple-double for an entire season, an achievement that seemed impossible, accomplished in 1961-62 with averages of 30.8 points, 12.5 rebounds, and 11.4 assists per game. Over more than 2 decades, Robertson not only changed the way the game was played, but also changed the way black players were viewed in sports. From 2 consecutive state championships with Crispus Attucks High School, the first all-black team in Indiana history to win the title, to 3 legendary years at the University of Cincinnati with an average of 33.8 points per game, he carved his name into history. He won the 1,960 Olympic gold medal, the 1,971 NBA championship with the Milwaukee Bucks, and was selected to 12 All-Star games, 11 All-NBA teams, and 1 MVP in 1964. Off the court, he was a pioneer in the fight for player equity, daring to sue the NBA and Robertson via NBA 1,970, 1,976, a lawsuit that paved the way for free agency, completely changing the league's history. For him, titles were never enough. What he craved was respect, fairness, and freedom for generations to come. But behind those glittering medals was a long string of lonely and painful nights. Born into poverty and racism, he was once denied hotel rooms, forced to eat separately, sleep separately while traveling for games. He grew up in silence, learning to turn humiliation into fuel for his resolve. When his peak had passed, he had to watch his career end quietly, forgotten amid the spotlight of the new generation. The greatest tragedy of his life came in 1997, when his daughter, thanks in advance, faced the deadly disease lupus. Without hesitation, he donated his kidney to her, turning a moment of pain into a symbol of fatherly love. Physical pain could not break his will, the man who had fought an entire system to protect justice. Today, at age 86, with blurred vision and trembling steps, he still shows up at local schools, teaching kids to shoot and talking about courage. The scars on his body and soul are not marks of defeat, but evidence of a life lived fully for dignity and the belief that, in the darkness, a person can still find light. He once made the whole world look up, but to earn that moment, Oscar Robertson had to go through a childhood where poverty and humiliation were his only companions. Born in Charlotte, Tennessee, in a South still heavy with the stench of racism, young Oscar grew up in a rundown house where winters were so cold the wind whistling through the wooden cracks sounded like moans. When he was just 4 years old, his family moved to the public housing projects in Indianapolis, a place coldly called for poor black folks. There were no playgrounds, no basketball, no dreams. Just dusty alleys and the sneering stares of white neighbors every time his mother stepped out the door. Basketball came to Oscar not through coaches, not through school, but from his own loneliness. He wrapped old rags into a ball, tied tight with rubber bands, then shot it into the broken rim his father hastily nailed together from a few pieces of wood. Each shot, bouncing off the old brick wall, echoed with a mournful sound, like the heart of a child wanting to hear someone say, "You did great." But no one said it. His father, a stern, quiet man, believed love was a luxury the poor couldn't afford to be soft about. His mother, a calm woman, just silently watched her son practice under the rain, then secretly left an old pair of gloves on the doorstep every night. At school, Oscar had no friends. He was the only black kid in the class, often called names that make people blush to hear even now. One day, the teacher made him stand and read aloud, and giggles erupted across the room. He tried to read, but his voice shook and choked. After class, while the other kids played outside, he sat alone, staring at his muddy, torn shoes, whispering, "One day, I'll make them listen." At age 12, he was given an old ball from the church, the only gift that made him believe God still remembered his name. From then on, the small concrete court behind the projects became Oscar's private world. He practiced shooting until his hands bled, until it was so dark he couldn't see the rim anymore. Basketball was how he talked to God, to his parents, to the very silence that had swallowed his childhood. When he grew up, Oscar enrolled at Crispus Attucks High School, the school for black students, where basketball wasn't just a game, but an escape. He met boys in the same situation, who understood that every shot was a way to rebel against prejudice. Under Coach Ray Crow, Oscar became the heart of the team. They played not just to win, but to survive. In the 1955 season, Crispus Attucks, the black school, unexpectedly reached the Indiana State Finals. The whole city held its breath. When the final buzzer sounded, the scoreboard lit up 97-74, the stands erupted, and Oscar cried. Not from happiness, but because he couldn't believe it was real. For the first time, black boys got to lift the trophy, got to dream. But that victory turned into another wound. When the school's parade went through downtown, police blocked the road, not letting them enter the city center. Too many black folks gathering, they said. The parade was forced to turn back, circling through the poor neighborhood where they were born, and where they were never allowed to be proud. Oscar's mother sat on the bus, tears streaming down. She whispered, "Even when we win, they make us feel wrong." Oscar didn't reply, just bowed his head. The celebratory music from the bus speakers suddenly felt out of place, like laughter at a funeral. That night, when the crowds had all gone home, Oscar returned to the gym. Under the dim lights, the long, empty rows of seats stretched out, with only the lingering smell of sweat, floor wax, and cigarette smoke. He sat in the front row, staring at the distant rim. Cold sweat trickled down his neck, mixing with tears he didn't want anyone to see. He whispered, voice trembling but firm, "I'll make them never forget my name." That statement, like a vow, a scar etched in his heart, became the drive for that poor boy to step out of the darkness, carrying both humiliation and aspiration, turning them into fire. And from that silent night, in the heart of a rejected child, a legend began. In 1957, Oscar Robertson stepped into the University of Cincinnati, where, in theory, talent would be celebrated and people treated fairly. But in reality, even in the North, a black young man still had to learn to live between two worlds, a world of cheering crowds and a world of doors slammed in his face. On the court, he was a phenomenon. 33.8 points per game, 14 NCAA records broken, 3 straight years as the nation's top player. But off the court, he was just a quiet black student, always sitting in the last row in class, eating alone in the cafeteria, and returning to the dorm while everyone else was laughing and joking. Robertson later recalled that he had to wash his clothes separately, eat separately, and was never once invited to the parties his teammates threw after wins. "They didn't hate me," he said later. "They just didn't know how to treat me like one of them." One winter night in 1958, Cincinnati was playing in the South. The whole team was booked into a fancy hotel, but when the bus arrived, the desk clerk quietly stepped out, pointed at Oscar and said, "He can't stay here." No one said anything. The coach stayed silent. The other players looked down. Robertson didn't react, just picked up his bag and walked out of the lobby. That night, he slept on the team bus windows fogged up, cold biting into his skin. The next morning, he stepped into the game and scored 45 points. The crowd stood and applauded. Teammates hugged each other, but he just bowed his head and went straight to the locker room. No one asked if he wanted dinner. He just drank water, sat still, letting the sweat dry on his skin. Under the flickering fluorescent lights, he thought to himself, "I learned to score points instead of the handshakes I'll never get." From then on, every game for him was no longer a competition, but a silent war. He wasn't just fighting opponents, but the doubt of an entire system. At Cincinnati, every time the ball was in his hands, it was a message. I exist. Fans called him a genius. Reporters called him Big O. But he just felt himself losing the ability to trust people. The biggest stage of his life was also where he felt the loneliest. After each win, he walked out of the locker room, down the long, echoing hallway, hearing the cheers still echoing behind, but no one walking with him. The sound of his own footsteps became his only companion. Once, on a road trip to Louisiana, after a win, he left the arena, sweat still on his collar. A group of white fans stood outside, clapping, but their voices mixed with mockery. "Hey, kid, you played great, but remember, just on the court." Robertson turned away, his smile fading. Those words followed him back to the dorm, haunting his nightmare-filled sleep. But the next morning, he woke early, practicing free throws in the empty gym, where only the sound of the ball hitting the wall echoed. With each thud, he felt he was answering his entire past for all those who had been buried in silence. 3 years at Cincinnati were 3 years of building an empire while being pushed into the shadows. The press hailed his records, calling him the greatest college player ever seen. But no one knew that some nights he lay in bed, eyes wide open till dawn, unable to sleep in the silence. Each win made him more loved, but also more isolated. Once, at the school's victory party, while other players danced with their girlfriends, he sat alone on the porch, watching snow fall through the window, listening to the music drifting out. A drunk student walked by, patted his shoulder and said, "Hey, Big O, you're a genius. But anyway, you're not like us." Robertson just smiled. He knew, sometimes a smile was the only cloak hiding sadness. On graduation day, the campus was bathed in sunshine. Thousands came, cheering as his name was called. Oscar Robertson, the pride of Cincinnati. The applause stretched like waves. He walked to the podium in his black gown, between rows of smiling students. But when he turned back, in that crowd, there were no parents, no one waving. They couldn't afford to come, and weren't sure there'd be a seat for them anyway. The sun shone straight into his eyes, making him blink, tears flowing unnoticed. The announcer thought he was emotional. The crowd clapped louder, but he just saw everything blur like an old photo burning. When the ceremony ended, everyone took pictures, laughed and talked, while he stood silently in the corner of the quad. In his hand, the honors diploma. At his feet, his own shadow. He looked up at the gleaming University of Cincinnati sign, and a small voice echoed inside. "Glory is the world's noise. Loneliness is the soul's music." That night he left the campus alone, his old shoes crunching on gravel, footsteps blending with the wind. Behind him, the stands went dark. Ahead, a new road waited, and he knew he'd have to keep walking not for the light, but for the silence. Stepping into the NBA in 1960, Oscar Robertson was no longer the lonely Cincinnati student. He was Big O, the new hope of the Cincinnati Royals, the player expected to change basketball forever. And he did. In the 1961-62 season, Oscar achieved a feat that the world would still marvel at decades later. Averages of 30.8 points, 12.5 rebounds, and 11.4 assists per game. For the whole season, he turned every limit into a joke. On the court, he was like a conductor of the universe, not just scoring, not just passing, but reading his teammates' breaths, the crowd's heartbeat, and sometimes even opponents' thoughts. But with glory came distance, an invisible boundary between genius and the rest of the world. The press called him the man of impossible numbers, the game-controlling brain. But even those who fought alongside him began whispering behind his back. They said he was too serious, no fun, not like anyone. One March evening in 1962, after a big win over Boston, the Royals' locker room buzzed with laughter, the smell of soap, sweat, victory all mixed. But in the far corner, Oscar sat silently, towel around his neck, eyes on the floor. He'd just notched another triple-double, but no one approached. From the next room, teammates' laughter rang out, mixed with beer cans popping, radio music. He just listened, didn't join in. Darkness from the ceiling seemed to settle on his shoulders. In that moment, Oscar realized glory never comes alone. It always carries the price of solitude. The media hailed him as the king without a throne, but they were the first to turn their backs. When the team lost, the first article always mentioned Robertson's name as if the blame was his. When he quietly refused to smile at photo ops, they wrote that Robertson is arrogant, cold, unapproachable. Their tone was like an obituary for a living soul. In the NBA, when you stop smiling, they call you a problem. But the truth was, Oscar just didn't know how to pretend. He didn't know how to smile amid injustice, didn't know how to pat the shoulder of someone who just called him boy behind his back. Off the court, his family life began cracking under the distance. Yvonne, the gentle wife who'd been by his side since college, became the quiet homemaker in an empty house. On game days, she woke at dawn, made breakfast for their two young kids, turned on the TV to watch her husband on screen, then turned it off when the announcer boomed, "Robertson again, unstoppable." She knew each time she heard that, he drifted further away. He rarely came home, seldom attended the kids' birthdays. A 1,963 birthday photo still exists, two kids blowing candles, Yvonne smiling, and the empty spot beside them where the father should have stood, just his Hasson 4 jersey draped over the chair. In the 1964 season, Oscar won MVP. When cameras turned to him, a reporter asked, "How does it feel to be the NBA's best player?" He replied calmly, "Success only means something if you're free to enjoy it." That statement irked many. In a league still full of restrictions, where players couldn't choose their teams, couldn't negotiate contracts, those words were like a knife into the system. And so the press started calling him something else. Troublemaker. Tensions within the Royals escalated. Some team leaders said he was arrogant, undisciplined. But what really scared them wasn't his attitude, it was his mind. Robertson saw the injustice the whole league had accepted for too long. He saw players forced into slave contracts, held for their careers without the right to leave. He saw a generation of talent crushed under owners' power, and he understood, if no one spoke up, the silence would continue swallowing everything. One evening in 1969, in his small Cincinnati apartment, he sat alone at his desk, lamplight reflecting off a thick stack of files. His eyes were heavy, not from fatigue, but from knowing he was about to light the fuse for a war that might destroy his own name. Outside, the wall clock ticked. Inside, he wrote the first lines of the lawsuit against the NBA. The suit that would bear his name, Robertson v. National Basketball Association. When his lawyer asked if he was sure, Oscar just replied, "If I don't speak, no one will dare." That statement was like a vow, the start of the biggest game of his life, a game with no crowd, no referee, no cheers, just silence and faith. That night, Yvonne walked in, saw him sitting pensively by the window, his face reflecting the streetlights outside. "Are you tired?" she asked. Robertson turned, gave a rare, slight smile. "No, I'm just thinking about how we can stop living in fear." Outside, winter was coming, but inside him, a fire had been lit, a fire of justice, rebellion, from a man who knew what rejection felt like, now rising so no one else would have to endure it. But like every light in his life, it also took the shape of loneliness, because in the place he was about to enter, no teammates would stand beside him, just one man against an empire. In 1970, while other NBA stars were busy with endorsement deals, parties, and applause, Oscar Robertson sat in a small office in Washington, D.C., facing a thick stack of files titled Robertson v. National Basketball Association. His lawsuit targeted the option clause, the rule allowing teams to hold rights to players forever, even after contracts expired. To many, it was a way to maintain order. To him, it was modern slavery. When he signed the complaint, A new chapter in American basketball opened, but it was also the bloodiest chapter of his life. As soon as the lawsuit was announced, a media storm hit. Newspapers across the country called him a traitor, the one who wants to destroy the NBA. Sports writers who once praised Big O now took turns writing that he was selfish, greedy, ungrateful. Teams turned their backs. They refused to mention his name at award events. Interview invitations were canceled. On game nights, crowds that once cheered every time he stepped on the court now booed, whistled, threw water bottles. Some held signs saying, "Go home, traitor." He didn't retaliate, just bowed his head, played in silence. But behind that calm was deep cracks in his soul. In the small house in Cincinnati, the phone rang all night with threats. Yvonne, his wife, anxiously looked through the curtains every evening, afraid someone would come smash the windows. One evening, when he returned from a meeting with the Players Association, his little daughter ran out and hugged his leg. "Daddy, why does everyone hate you?" He stood silently, not knowing how to answer. He just bent down, hugged her close, whispered, "Daddy doesn't want them to hate anyone, sweetie. Daddy just wants them to learn to respect." But as he said it, another question echoed in his heart. Am I doing the right thing? Amid that, the NBA did everything to isolate him. Young players were warned not to side with Robertson, or they'd be blacklisted. Teams showing support were subtly reminded of the league's interests. Even a few close former teammates avoided his eyes at events. A reporter asked him, "Do you feel lonely?" He just smiled. "I've been used to loneliness for a long time." But that smile couldn't hide his dark circles, his weary eyes, as if each passing day aged him a few years more. The lawsuit dragged on for 6 years. A grueling legal battle where each hearing felt like another finals game. Robertson often sat for hours in court, listening to NBA lawyers argue that players needed to be bound for the league's stability. He gritted his teeth, but sometimes his fists clenched so tight they drew blood. He remembered those cold nights on the college bus, kicked out of hotels just for his skin color. History just renamed the forms of oppression, but never got rid of it, he thought. When summer 1971 came, he was traded to the Milwaukee Bucks, a move many believed was the price to pay for daring to stand up. But there, he and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar led the Bucks to the team's first NBA championship in history. In the moment of lifting the trophy, he heard the crowd roaring, but his heart remained empty. Inside the locker room, amid teammates' cheers, he sat alone, gripping the championship ring, eyes distant. The joy of victory couldn't erase the wounds of isolation. That night, while everyone went out to celebrate, he returned to his room early, looked at the city lights outside the window and wondered, why does victory feel so lonely? The legal battle continued. In the years that followed, his health declined from the stress. Friends said many nights Oscar was sleepless, pacing the living room, wearing headphones, listening to news, waiting for any sign that justice was near. But justice, as he said, always comes late and wears a cold face. In 1976, the court finally ruled the NBA must abolish the option clause and allow players free contract negotiations. The world called it a turning point. The day players got free. Young players after him, from Magic Johnson to Michael Jordan, all walked the path he opened. But when the news announced the victory, Oscar didn't smile. No fireworks, no celebration party, just the sound of rain outside the window and tired breaths in the quiet house. He sat in front of the TV, muted the sound, watched his image appear, not in a jersey, but in a black suit, eyes pensive. He'd fought his whole life to see this day, but when it came, he just felt empty. The price of freedom was the trade-off of his soul. He'd lost friends, lost the public's affection, lost years he could have enjoyed with his family. That night, when Yvonne walked into the room and saw her husband sitting still in the dark, she asked, "You won. Why aren't you happy?" Robertson replied softly, voice hoarse and slow as if each word weighed like memories. "I won for generations after, but I lost myself." Outside, Rain fell steadily on the roof. In the room, he held the 1,971 championship ring, turning it over in his hand, the gold dimly reflecting in his aged eyes. Somewhere in the past, young Oscar was still sitting under those stands, looking at the rim and promising himself, "I'll make them never forget my name." And now, though the world had changed, that promise remained. But in exchange, that name had cost a man the last piece in his heart. In 1974, Oscar Robertson retired. After more than 14 seasons, thousands of shots, millions of cheers, he left the court on an evening without fireworks, without an official farewell. When he stepped out of the Milwaukee arena, only a few reporters were there to take photos. One asked, "Do you have any message for the fans?" He smiled faintly, replied softly, "Thank you for listening to me, even if just for a while." That seemingly simple statement became the loneliest farewell in NBA history. No tribute ceremony, no coaching offers came. The teams, who had benefited from the freedom he brought, now stayed silent. They forgot that the man once seen as trouble had given them the right to negotiate, the right to choose their own path. But basketball, like life, is always cold to those who have passed through. Robertson returned to Cincinnati, the city where he started. He opened Orcam Chemical Company in 1981, hoping to create jobs for local black people. But the business world was as harsh as the NBA. No one wanted to invest in a business owned by a black ex-athlete. He drove himself to factories, stores, carrying product samples, convincing customers to buy. Some days he was rejected dozens of times. When night fell, he still drove home, streetlights flashing in the rearview mirror on his tired, silent face. Someone once asked, "Don't you miss the court?" He smiled, but his eyes drifted. "Every night, I hear the crowd in my head." Indeed, some nights he bolted awake at midnight, turned on the light, went to the display case holding the old ball from Milwaukee days. He picked it up, spun it lightly, smelled the faded rubber. The sound of ball on wood floor echoed in the empty house, and in that moment, he was again the 20-year-old soaring amid cheers. But then reality pulled him back, aching back, creaky knees, eyes blurred by time. Life after retirement was no longer glamorous. Newspapers stopped mentioning him, except when talking about forgotten legends. He read that article, folded it, said nothing. Yvonne said, "You don't need them to remember." He stayed silent, just looked out the window at the autumn trees, shedding leaves, and said softly, "But they need to remember what I did for them." Then came 1997, when life dealt him a blow more painful than any defeat on the court. His daughter, thanks in advance, then just over 20, suddenly fell ill. At first fatigue, then fever, then weakness. Doctors diagnosed lupus, a rare autoimmune disease destroying her kidneys. He sat silently listening, unable to believe his ears. The doctor spoke slowly, voice soft as if afraid to shatter fragile hope. "Needs a kidney transplant, and soon, or else." Robertson looked around the stark white room, heard the steady beep of the heart monitor, and suddenly felt all the years of struggle, fame, justice he'd fought for become meaningless. A few days later, he and Yvonne went to the hospital for tests. Results showed his kidney was a match for donation. When he heard, he said nothing. He just nodded, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. But when the doctor left the room, Yvonne saw her husband gripping the table edge, head bowed, shoulders shaking. He dropped to his knees, hands covering his face, sobs breaking out. The first cry after decades of silence. The man who faced giant power systems, challenged the entire NBA, endured thousands of crowd boos, now collapsed because of 3 short words. "My daughter is sick. I fought for human freedom," he said in broken breaths. "But I can't do anything against a body betraying my own daughter." Yvonne held him, their tears mixing. In that moment, everything he'd thought was strength, fame, justice, money, became empty concepts. Justice, fame, Money, none of it can save my daughter, he repeated, voice shattering into pieces. In the days waiting for surgery, he lived like in a dream. Days, he still went to the company, pretending busy with papers, signing contracts, but every time someone talked about success, he just wanted to leave. Nights, he sat by Thanks in Advance's bedside, holding her hand, watching 4 drops fall one by one. She smiled weakly. "Don't worry, Dad. I'm okay." He nodded, but eyes red. In his head echoed unanswered questions. Why did God choose this trial for him after all? Was it because he dared fight a system, or because he needed to learn to hurt like an ordinary man again? The hospital room was quiet. On the table was a small photo of him and Thanks in Advance when she was little, sitting on his shoulders on the old court. In the photo, both smiled radiantly under the Sunday thanks. Now, that light was just memory. He watched her sleep, then whispered like a prayer, "If someone has to suffer instead, let it be me." The night before surgery, he didn't sleep. He went out to the hallway, looked at the white hospital lights, heard distant heart monitor beeps. His steps were heavy, back more hunched than ever. Each step trod on memories, from the boy blocked from parading, the lonely college guy on the bus, to the man suing the entire NBA. He'd fought his whole life, but never feared like now. For the first time, the man who never bowed to power felt powerless before his own daughter's life. When dawn broke, he returned to the room, looked at Thanks in Advance still sleeping, face peaceful, hair spread on the white pillow. Morning light streamed through the window, shining on the family photo on the wall. Robertson took a deep breath, placed hand on his heart. Where once hid the iron will of a warrior, now only a father's love remained. And in that stillness, he knew the next battle wasn't to win, but just to keep one person. The surgery was scheduled for a June morning in 1997. Cincinnati University Hospital glowed under fluorescent lights, white hallways, antiseptic smell in every breath. Oscar Robertson lay on the gurney, loose hospital gown over the once steel-strong body. He'd entered hundreds of games in his life, faced legends, taken the hardest hits, but never feared like this. Outside the OR, Thanks in Advance, his 6-year-old daughter, frail and weak, tried to smile. "Dad, I don't want you to do this." Robertson took her hand, his large, rough hand enveloping her small one. "Hush," he said softly, voice deep and warm. "This is just another pass, and I've never missed one." She laughed, but tears flowed. As nurses wheeled the gurney away, wheels squeaked softly on tile. Hallway lights streamed backward on the ceiling like endless light bands. In that moment, Robertson closed his eyes and saw his whole life again. The boy wrapping rags into a ball behind the projects, the college student sleeping on the bus, the Cincinnati Royals captain raising the ball amid boos, the man standing in court against the system. But this time, no crowd, no cheers. This was the final game. Not for honor, not for justice, but for a child's life. In the OR, light so white it hurt the eyes. Monitor beeps steady like the old court's low heartbeat. A doctor touched his shoulder lightly, whispered, "We're putting you under now, Mr. Robertson. Think of what makes you most at peace." He smiled, whispered, the sound of the ball bouncing on the floor. Then the light went out. When he woke, the hospital ceiling blurred in heavy eyes. A sharp pain stabbed through his abdomen, making him grit his teeth. Each breath a new cut. He heard his heart beating, each slow, heavy thump, like a hammer. A nurse approached, said softly, "Surgery successful. Your kidney is working well in your daughter's body." Robertson wanted to say something, but throat dry. He just nodded, tears spilling, not from pain but relief. The days after were brutal physical trials. He lost nearly 30 pounds, body exhausted, steps slow like carrying the world on his shoulders. Each morning, nurses helped him walk, each small step like a full quarter. He bit his lip enduring, sweat soaking his gown, arms once strong now too weak to lift a cup. In the mirror, face gaunt, skin wrinkled, eyes deep set, but in that gaze, still something age and scalpel couldn't take, resolve. As health slowly recovered, thanks in advance was moved to a regular room. The day he first walked to her bedside, Yvonne held her breath. He trembled, holding thanks in advance's hand. She looked at her father, smiled radiantly, cheeks pink again. "You won, Dad," she said. He laughed hoarsely. "No, this time we tied." The press got wind. Articles flooded major papers. Oscar Robertson, from court legend to real-life hero. They praised him as a symbol of fatherhood. A hero not just in sports but in character. But when reporters came for interviews, he said just one thing: "I don't want to be a hero. I just want my daughter to live." That simple yet powerful statement spread across America. After thanks in advance recovered, Robertson partnered with the National Kidney Foundation, becoming spokesman for the National Organ Donation Campaign. He went everywhere: schools, churches, hospitals, sharing his story. His voice deep, slow, emotional, far from the stern tone that once intimidated reporters. "I fought for players' freedom," he said. "But then I realized true freedom is when we dare give part of ourselves to save someone else." Listeners often stood applauding, not for his name, but because they saw in this man something rare in an achievement era: compassion that scores no points. But fate always likes to tease the strong. A few years after surgery, during a routine checkup, the doctor said his remaining kidney was starting to weaken slightly. Not serious, but concerning. Robertson heard, just stayed silent. At home, he opened the living room door, looked at the old ball in the display case. He touched its surface, said softly, "We're still good. We've been through worse." But that night, Yvonne saw her husband sitting in the dark, hand on belly, sighing. He didn't complain, didn't blame, just closed his eyes, thanks in advance's healthy smile in his mind. One autumn afternoon, father and daughter strolled the hospital grounds, once the line between life and death. Golden leaves blanketed the path, sunlight slanting through trees on their faces. Thanks in advance said, "Dad, you know, whenever I'm tired, I think of how you fought. I'm not afraid anymore." Robertson looked at her, eyes warm but sad. "I learned from you too, that sometimes winning isn't beating others, but surviving together." That evening, with the family asleep, he opened his notebook, wrote a few short lines. "I once fought the world to prove I was worthy. Now, I just fight my own body. To keep my promise to my daughter, I gave away part of my body, but in return got the peace fame never brought." He closed the notebook, turned off the light, looked out the window where moonlight spilled on the floor. Heater crackled, blending with slow heartbeat. Quiet night, far from every stage he'd stood on. Somewhere, perhaps God smiled down, seeing the old basketball warrior still held the most precious thing: kindness amid a life of many wounds. And in that silence, Oscar Robertson knew that if he didn't wake tomorrow, his greatest legacy wasn't in the Hall of Fame display, but in the heart of a girl carrying part of her father's flesh and blood, a gift no glory could match. 2025. Cincinnati entered autumn, golden leaves blanketing the court, light wind whispering something only he could hear. Oscar Robertson is now 86 years old, the body once a symbol of strength now frail, trembling. Each morning, he needs nearly 10 minutes to get out of bed. High blood pressure blurs his vision, sometimes seeing only faint shapes of the room, walls hung with faded photos. 1,960 Olympic team, 1,970, one Milwaukee Bucks, him holding thanks in advance after surgery. Every photo has light, but in his eyes, they now seem like distant lamps, light he'd left behind too long. Each morning, he slowly practices walking around the small courtyard behind the house. The cane in his hand taps lightly on the paved tiles, each step accompanied by heavy breathing. Sunlight filters through the window frame, reflecting on the 1,960 Olympic team photo hanging on the living room wall, where the young man once stood among his teammates, smiling radiantly, the gold medal gleaming on his chest. Now, that light shines down on his aged body, the medal still there, but the breath of the man carrying it growing shorter. He slowly steps over, lightly touches the photo, and softly says, "You boys have gone far, and I'm still here, waiting for my final turn." On TV, every day people talk about LeBron, Curry, Westbrook, the bright names of the new generation. Commentators mention triple-doubles, but few remember that the first to achieve it for an entire season was him. Occasionally, a young reporter asks about him, but mostly just for comparison. Robertson was the Westbrook of the old days. The statement, meant as praise, stings instead. At night, when the house sinks into silence, he still hears echoing in his head the cheers from decades long past, the world's noise that has forgotten him. But instead of resentment, he just smiles. Some things, he understands, don't need to be reclaimed. One afternoon, the local TV station came for an interview. The young reporter, probably not yet 30, hesitantly asked, "Mr. Robertson, do you ever feel sad about being forgotten?" He looked up, eyes cloudy but kind. "No," he replied slowly. "I just regret that many people forget the meaning of the freedom they have." The reporter fell silent. He continued, "When I was playing, players couldn't choose where they wanted to go, couldn't negotiate, couldn't say no. Now they can do all that. They don't need to know my name. As long as they live up to that freedom, that's enough." That statement rang out gently, but it carried the echo of decades of struggle, of lonely nights in a dark room, of a man who endured the whole world turning its back so the next generation could be freer. After the interview, he sat alone again. Outside the window, sunset blazed red. In his mind, sounds mingled. The gavel striking in the 1976 lawsuit, his daughter's heartbeat on the monitor, and the ball bouncing on the wooden floor in 1962, all blending into a final melody, sad, beautiful, and quiet. Another day, he returned to Crispus-Attucks High School, where it all began. The old school now transformed, court repainted, brand new stands. But the soul of the place still bears the footprints of the boy who once wrapped rags into a ball. He stepped onto the court, cane tapping on the concrete. A group of kids playing ball stopped to look. A boy about 10 years old with frizzy hair approached and asked, "Mister, did you used to play ball too?" Robertson smiled, eyes crinkling. "Yeah, a long time ago." The boy surprised. "Were you good?" He didn't answer, just took the ball, spun it lightly in his hand. Though his hands trembled, his shot was still smooth as ever. The ball arced perfectly, swishing through the net. The kids clapped, and he just looked up at the rim, sunlight piercing through silver hair, shining on a face glistening with sweat and nostalgia. In that moment, time stopped. No longer 86 years old, no longer ill, just Big O, the man who once soared. As dusk fell, he sat back on the wooden bench by the court, the kids all gone. The sound of bouncing balls still echoed somewhere, like his heartbeat blending with memories. He remembered all he'd given: youth for justice, body for his daughter, fame for freer generations. And he realized his life was never truly a tragedy. It was just a series of falls so others could stand. One winter evening, Thanks in Advance came to visit. She was now healthy, eyes bright, smile fresh. They sat together in the living room, watching an old video, him holding the 1,971 championship trophy. "Dad, did you ever think you were great?" she asked. Robertson laughed. "Great? No, I just knew how to endure. And the one who endures while keeping kindness, that's true greatness." She fell silent, then leaned down to kiss her father's hand lightly, the hand that trembled with age but still gripped faith tightly. That night, after Thanks in Advance left, he sat alone in the living room. Outside, cold wind blew through the trees, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. On the table was the old ball, beside an unsent letter, a letter he wrote to the new generation of players. Don't fear loneliness. The applause will fade, but integrity won't. When everything leaves you, fame, money, fans, hold on to self-respect. It will be the final rebound of your life. He set the pen down, looked at the shaky handwriting on the page. The room light dimmed, only moonlight shining on his deeply wrinkled face. The clock ticked steadily, like the rhythm of the ball long ago. He closed his eyes, listening to that sound again, the sound of his life. One life he gave away, the narrator's voice rang out from afar. Youth for justice, body for his daughter, light for freer generations. But in his eyes, true greatness lies not in records, but in enduring pain and still choosing love. Outside, night deepened. He still sat there, frail figure, eyes half closed, hand on the old ball. The bouncing sound echoed from afar. 1, 2, then silence. The room sank into the final sunset glow, pale gold and warm like memory. If someone asks, "Who is Big O?" say that he is the man who learned to win in silence. There is a quiet sadness that the story of Oscar Robertson leaves behind. The sadness of a life that paid dearly so those after could walk lighter. From the Crispus Attucks Championship Parade, blocked by police outside downtown Indianapolis in 1955-56, to the night he was chased out the back door of a southern hotel only to return and score 45 points, Big O learned to turn insults into fuel and speak in a language America was forced to hear. Numbers and dignity. The 1961-62 season, with a full-season triple-double, was not just a sports feat. It was a declaration that a black man's talent could bend every rule. But the price of genius is solitude. The noisy locker room next door while he sat silent in a corner, the small family with Yvonne and the birthdays he missed. The moral climax of his life was the 1976 lawsuit against the option clause. When reporters asked, he knew he'd be called the League Destroyer, but signed anyway. So free agency became the right of today's LeBron, Curry, Westbrook generation. And the most human rebound was in 1997, donating his kidney to save thanks in advance. After surgery losing 30 pounds, relearning to walk, telling the press, "I don't want to be a hero, I just want my daughter to live," then advocating organ donation with the National Kidney Foundation. At age 86, eyes blurred by high blood pressure, he said on TV, "I just regret that many people forget the meaning of the freedom they have," then returned to the Crispus Attucks court, sinking a swish in front of kids who don't know who he is. The lesson for Americans today is simple yet hard. Don't forget who paid for your freedom. Honor it by living responsibly, from supporting fair labor rights, practicing organ donation, to keeping kindness in debate. Greatness is not in the scoreboard, but in enduring pain and still choosing love. Thank you for joining us and listening to the resilient journey of basketball legend Oscar Robertson, the man who won even in silence. Please subscribe to the channel, share this video so we can continue telling stories of courage, dignity, and the immortal legacy of great people in the next video.